Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Spark Hub podcast. My name is Alan, and if I sound slightly different, it's not because I've had surgery, it's because I have a cold and have done for a few days now. So apologies for the deep voice and the stuffed up nose. I'm excited for this episode because as a parent, I know that there's no manual to raising kids. There's no right or wrong way within reason to raise children. And this episode is almost in complete contrast to the previous episode we did. Previous episode, we spoke to Liran Rabinowitz, certainly about his the way that his wife and he limit screen time with their children and to what the pros and cons of those are. Eugene is a parent himself. He's also a fellow co-worker from a long time ago, and Eugene specializes in design and gaming. And so he's been in the children's entertainment industry for quite a while. And in this conversation, you'll hear somewhat of an opposing view to the last one. Not a wrong one, not a right one, just slightly different on how gaming, screen time can empower children, but within limits. So as always, there's lots of notes in the show notes below the episode. And without further ado, please enjoy this episode with Eugene on gaming. So thanks, Eugene, for coming on the Spark Hub podcast. As is tradition, I always like to open with a guest's quote about the topic. So what is your quote?
Well, I have a few, but the one that always sort of sticks in my mind is one I actually saw written on the wall. I'd like to say that I read this somewhere intellectual, but I saw it on the wall of a bathroom in a kid's play center, basically. But it's a George Bernard Shaw quote, which as soon as I read it, it's just always stuck, which is that we don't stop playing because we grow old because we stop playing. And for me, that kind of underpins everything I do. It underpins my career, really. The design I do, the games we work on, kind of everything is that essence of, people have kind of forgotten to have fun, and actually having fun is kind of the key, even as a sort of a human state of mind. If you're having fun, you're learning, you're engaging, and you're absorbing. And so that kind of, to me, as soon as I read that, I was like, yeah, that's kind of my mantra, I think.
So that resonates, and I 100% agree. I think I have a quote somewhere myself, which is similar. It's Albert Einstein, which is creativity is intelligence having fun.
Yeah,
It's that kind of thing.
It's when your brain gets to riff, and so many times, in kind of agency life, I think of the horrible scenario of a brainstorm, and that notion of just have fun, just go out there and forget about whether it's right or wrong, or forget about what other people think of it. If it's tickling your brain, get it out there and explore it and have fun with it and see what happens, because 9 times out of 10, something brilliant will fall out of it.
100%. And I think maybe we should maybe just start quickly with your background. And full disclosure for the listeners, you and I have worked together in the past, and we worked together at a marketing agency that had a lot of entertainment clients, and it was a kids and family focused agency. So since we've worked together, and before and after that, maybe just give us a quick overview of your path in life and your career.
Sure. I kind of before education and before career, and probably when I was about 7 years old, all I ever wanted to do was cartoon voices and silly sound effects. So that's kind of where my head was from being a kid. Is I want to do something fun and silly, and probably to do with cartoons. Did design at university, and then managed to get a job at an agency called Foresight. Many of whom colleagues from Foresight are still friends, and we still see. But essentially, my very first job was designing the website for Mulan, the original Mulan, back in 97, 98, I think it probably was. And very quickly thereafter, starting to look at games in Flash, which at the time was kind of still new, and even Macromedia Director, we did some stuff in that. But really, my entire career has been digital fun for clients, as you say, like Disney and Xbox and PlayStation and the BBC, and lots and lots of kids and family brands. And I started as a designer, but then to art director, then eventually to creative director. Always working with teams of designers and developers who are similarly minded, which always helps because everybody bounces off everybody else. But yeah, always trying to do work that has kind of a fun spin to it. Something that engages, something that's entertaining, something that's silly. I used to jokingly tell people that, my job is basically, fart noises and whiz bang. and that's kind of what it is. But then about 10 years ago, I left agency life and started up my own micro agency, I guess you'd call it, called Remo Creative, and managed to carry on doing much of the same stuff that I've always loved doing. So, still work with people like Disney and 20th Century Fox, well, Disney again. And then we've kind of branched into more in-venue sort of gaming experiences. So we created all the digital work for Flight Club, the darts bar, which is now taking over the world. And we're working with a couple of other sort of similar social gaming clients. And we also do a lot of animation work and stuff as well. So I still very much hands-on, which is kind of one of the reasons why I set up on my own, is so that I could maintain a sort of a hands-on approach, but also kind of steer the work in the direction that I wanted it to go in. So I've been very lucky.
It's a great career, and I think what also qualifies you for Spark Hub is you're a parent.
Indeed, and yeah, it's the interesting thing is having your own focus group. I've got a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old, both girls. One of them fiercely intelligent, and the other fiercely crazy. So it's nice to have kind of two different mindsets there. But yeah, it's amazing how, before you're a parent, you assume a lot. You assume that you know a lot about what kids want, how they work, and I've had really a whole career before having kids of kind of expanding on that knowledge and exploring it and learning from it. But when you then actually have two little monsters running around every day, and you actually see how they behave and how they react and how their brains function, it's quite reassuring for that some of what you think is true, but it's the surprises and the things that you kind of look at and you go, right, that's how that works, or that's what they think about this. So yeah, it definitely gives you an incredible insight.
And what I've noticed is you can never bring what you learn at work home, because it doesn't play. So you almost have to change your tactic.
There is a desire to always do something different and something new and something crazier and, a level up from last time. And whilst on a sort of an advertising creative bent, that kind of works. But, when you're talking about gaming and interaction and trying to create something that people manage to get and they don't have to think about too much, especially kids, trying something new every time is not necessarily the best way around. We used to have a kind of a joke when we were looking at new campaigns for new films and thinking, what games could we do online? And, the likes of matching pairs or, puzzle games was always kind of kicked around. It's like, yeah, we'll do another matching pairs game. Like, nobody likes matching pairs. Well, the gag is everybody does, and everybody plays it, and everybody knows how to play it. And it's one of those things that, a 4-year-old today is coming to matching pairs for the first time. And it's quite complicated for a 4-year-old, So there's an element of, yes, try different things, try new things. Absolutely. That's how we develop and grow. But don't discount, what's already there, because your audience is new every year. There's kids age. So what you think kids don't want today, well, they still do. So as I said, there's kind of that element of there are formulas that work. It's how do you develop it? How do you deliver that in a more interesting way, or how do you refresh it? So there's kind of two sides there. It's trying to do new and different, but also there's a lot of stuff that works, and it works for good reason.
Yeah, 100%. Interestingly, just to kind of back up a minute, one of the reasons I started this project called Spark Hub is I'm a parent like you are, and like everyone else, I hope, listening. And things are moving a lot quicker, I think, than I thought they would, in terms of technology, in terms of addiction, in terms of any number of things that a parent should worry about. Yeah. And gaming specifically is one. I was a gamer when I was a kid, but I had to boot up a computer. I had to learn how to code. I had to be patient.
Yeah.
There was all these other skills that gaming taught me when I was younger. And so Spark Hub is really a conversation with different people to talk about these topics and hopefully, think about what our kids would be like as adults, but how do we spark interest in them in children to get them to these good places, not the bad places. So that's my philosophy. But as I look at stuff like gaming, I go, right, my point of reference was floppy disks and coding and 16 color screens if I was lucky. And now I look at the definition of what my kids have and the reality of it and the gruesomeness of it. And I suppose that the question I'm driving to is gaming can go one of two ways, in my opinion. It could be really positive and, as you say, teach lots of skills, but it can also isolate people or create addiction. And so in the way that you create games or in the way that you work on games or in the way you philosophize about games, how do you run that fine line saying this is probably going to be good and not bad, but somehow it can go either way? How do you kind of deal with that?
Well, I think there's kind of two clear lanes in my head. One is creating a game for the fun of the game. And what I mean by that is, console games, for example, they are there purely for an adrenaline hit, something fun, and might be gruesome, might be fighting and shooting, it might be flying, it might be running along and collecting coins. Whatever that is, it's purely for the fun of that game. The second channel in my mind is very much interaction that's fun, which could be anything. It could be filling out a form on a website and it's just done in a fun, quirky way that kind of makes it interesting. Now, that's not necessarily what you'd consider a game, but, trying to get people to learn something or interact with something in a fun and interesting way, and attaching a score to that or a level of skill to that's a game. And that doesn't have to be themed. It doesn't, it's not a shooting game. It's not blood and guts and gore. It's, it's something completely different. So I think there's kind of two routes there. And people, when they talk about gaming, I think a lot of people think PlayStation and Xbox and console games and Fortnite and, Call of Duty and all that sort of stuff. And that has a place. Absolutely it does. It's debatable as to how young that should skew, and it does unfortunately get picked up by younger kids and they see it everywhere, and you'll have the same argument about social media, I suppose. But to me, it's more a case of how do we take a subject matter and make that more interesting, and that might be a game, rather than how do we take a game about this and use it to teach that. It's kind of coming at it from the other way around, and I think that's kind of what we've always done. Is rather than trying to say, hey, we've got a cool pinball game, how do we use that? It's more, well, actually, we need something that gets across these quirky characters and some of the themes of the film. How could we do that? For example, for a campaign for Disney, for example. So yeah, in my mind, it's less worrying about what games are potentially doing to our children. It's more, how do we just get subject matter across in a much more fun way, and a game is a way to do that.
Let me ask you a personal question. What's your screen time policy in your house with your kids?
We try and, well, that in itself is it's a deeper question, because as you were saying, when we were younger, gaming was, taking, lines and lines and lines of code off the back of a magazine and typing it into a computer to program a free game, or sticking a tape deck into something and waiting for 10 minutes while it loads, and, that kind of element. I think that there's amazing opportunities for kids today to kind of learn coding and learn computer building, and things like Raspberry Pi, for example, fabulous, and there's umpteen applications out there that teach kids the basics of coding, and that's all fabulous stuff. But I think for most kids today, they just pick up a tablet like it's a book. They don't care about how the stuff gets on screen, don't even think about it. It's just a tool for them. And when we had our first daughter, we used to have a lot of conversations about, are we happy with her using an iPad? And, what's that gonna teach her? Is she going to become a screen junkie? And as we've learned over the last few years, it's such an integral part of their lives, whether at home or at school or wherever they are. screens and touch screens and interaction, it's not just limited to my kids sitting on the couch with an iPad. They could be traveling on a train and using the ticket machine. They could, whatever it is, they're used to screen-based technology. And I think that there's maybe a danger sometimes when parents kind of think, well, I'm not happy about them being on an iPad. It's like, it's just a tool. It's the content that you need to worry about. And my elder daughter, who's 9, she does her maths and reading stuff on an iPad, and that is part of the curriculum. It's set by the school. And as far as I'm concerned, it's fabulous content. She knows how to use it. She's, she does her times tables and, reels them off every morning. And I think that's fine. What I'm less happy about is when she sits and I catch her playing Candy Crush for half an hour. It's like, come on, let's do something a little bit more constructive. Candy Crush is great. It's a wonderful game. It's brilliant. But I don't want her sitting on an iPad necessarily playing a game for a game's sake. If it's part of her learning and part of the curriculum and she's getting something out of it, absolutely happy for it. So it's a tricky one, I think
it's more about as you said, it's more about the content. And the reason I bring it up is because in running Spark Hub, I've met every spectrum of person. Some who say 30 minutes a day, and it seems to be tied, in my opinion, to like an old TV metric that no one uses anymore, where you had 3 channels and you get Saturday morning cartoons, and that was your cheat day, and then every other day it had to be documentaries or something. And there's an old school mentality that takes the TV world and applies it to the iPad, which I think is wrong. And then there's the other extreme where there's just liberal parents who literally through COVID would just let their kids watch whatever they want and binge YouTube and have no quality control. And so parents seem to struggle with both those spectrums. And what I've learned is that quality of content's one thing, but there's a quantity of content as well. And also there seems to be, and this is an observation across many episodes, we're human, we need to move. And there's been a downplaying of phys ed. There's been a debudgetization, a descoping of the kinetic activities. The last guy I spoke to on my last episode said that where he lives in Gibraltar, they banned running in school because they deemed it too dangerous. And so I these are the types of things where I go, there is a balance. And I think, as a parent, I like my child to lead me, but at some point I have to put guidelines in place. And when behavior...
Absolutely. It's going to be different cases for different families and different kids. I mean, even our 2 kids, I see the way that both of them interact with technology. I would probably let not just because of an age thing, but personality-wise, I'd let my older kid probably do more iPad-based stuff than my other kid, because I know that my older one is actually doing stuff that's much more creative and that she's learning. So, for example, Minecraft is something that she loves. I think Minecraft's wonderful. It's building, it's imagination, creativity. I think that's fabulous. The other one probably wants to play, CBeebies games, which are wonderful games. They're absolutely fabulous, but they're some of them are more just games for game's sake. Well, I stress that there is some wonderful educational content on CBeebies. I'm not having a CBeebies back, but it's more, she would be gaming for gaming's sake, whereas my older daughter is more, she wants to learn stuff, she wants to build stuff and create stuff. And I think that's kind of where you have to say, all right, what are they actually doing on there, and is it beneficial for them? My older daughter also loves writing stories, so she actually uses the iPad a lot. She sits there and types and writes stories. I could say that I'd rather she do that with a pen and paper, but you know what? It's she can edit it and change it, and it's creative and it's keeping her mind going. So that's fine. But all of that comes with a balance of, you've had enough iPad, you've had enough TV. Go outside and bounce on the trampoline, whatever that might be. So that's going to be very, very individual. I think there's always going to be that same argument that going back to the kind of the console thing, parents will have that constant fight with their kids over get off the Xbox, get off the PlayStation, and do something more useful. So that's where my mind is. I'm kind of, if they're doing something useful and creative and they're learning something from it, fine. There is no way our kids are allowed their iPads in their bedroom. They are not allowed to just free surf on YouTube. There's no way I would let my kids on social media. So there's all those kind of underpinning rules we already have in place. But yeah, as I said, it's so much a part of their world that I don't think you can deny them. I think it's, as we said earlier, it's about the content. It's about what are they actually doing on that.
Well, interestingly, and I brought this up, curious to the last guest I had, just to give you a background, the last guest has 4 daughters, and they actually have, he works in emerging technology. So again, he's someone in the industry, but they don't use screens in their household for very interesting reasons. And these are 4 different personalities. But he said they'll get to technology eventually. For now, I just want them to learn how to be human. And so it's more about empathy and creativity and creating stories. And it's more about imagination without screens, which again, there's no right or wrong in parenting, but I think it's a fascinating perspective. Because famously, Steve Jobs, who founded Apple, didn't let his kids use iPads. And famously, there's a podcaster named Ben Shapiro who's built a whole media empire, but he's very religiously Jewish, and his kids use pen and paper. Until a certain age. So it makes me think of, I was reading about Amish kids, right? And famously the Amish don't use technology, but what they do is you can't use technology to a certain age, and then you can have free run of it. Because we think for 20 years or 18 years or however long it is, you need to develop a connection with a higher power. You need to develop your human skills first. And then, by the way, you can have a run at technology later, which I find it all fascinating. And the point I'm trying to make is, as I said earlier before, your quote about, we need to learn how to play, I think is definitely key. And I think it's key for the future, because I don't see a future where jobs are predictable anymore, where employment is predictable, where income is predictable. I think we're in a gig economy. I think that's going to continue. And I think you have to develop multifaceted skills. It's not like the old days where you train to be just a lawyer, you train to be just a doctor. Nowadays, if you are doing those professions, you have a side hustle for sure, or you do make money online.
Oh, look, absolutely. And I think, the pandemic has certainly shown that up. And the amount of people who, have sadly lost their jobs or had to move into another industry. I say sadly, for a lot of people, it's been an eye opener, and actually it's allowed them to do something different and taken their lives in another direction. But, I think that certainly my professional perspective is what I thought was quite unique, but actually it isn't, in that, a designer can turn their hands to a lot of things. I think especially when you're running your own show, you have to become a project manager. You have to become excellent at time management and organization, as well as being a designer, as well as being a creative director and an animator and an illustrator and all these other things. You have to have all those skills. And, just as a side note, I'm very glad that I started doing my own thing kind of 15-ish years or 15 or 20 years into my career, because before that, I don't think I'd have had all the skills necessary to make what I'm doing successful. And I think you're right. I think there's such a broad spread of job description, and people aren't going to just be one thing in the future. And I think that technology is definitely a part of that. I think that kids growing up today have to kind of embrace technology. It's the world around them. They can't ignore it. And more jobs and more roles are going to be so heavily reliant on it. There's always going to be sort of what I hesitate to call traditional industries, but I think that the more kids see is possible, the more they understand, the depth and breadth of the world around them and what's open to them as they grow up. I think that's a good thing. And it is back to our point about the individual. There are some kids for whom it's totally wrong and that it just doesn't suit. And there are other kids who soak it up like a sponge. And as long as the content is the kind of stuff that is beneficial to them, and it's not just kind of pure entertainment and pure gaming, I really only see that as a positive.
I would agree. And so let me ask you a question that plagues me a lot, and I think it's some of the other guests I've spoken to as well. As wonderful as technology can be, how much do you worry about artificial intelligence, metaverse, people getting sucked into the matrix, as it were? How much of that plagues your mind as a parent to say that actually the physical world may not be interesting? You're creating wonderful games, you're creating addiction in a good way, but actually there is a real planet we have to run. And how much do you worry that your kids might get sucked into some form of other world?
I guess I think that and again, this is very individual. I see my girls as both being astute enough to understand what's real, what's not. And so if we're talking purely about, things like the metaverse and, the metaverse is one side. Social media is kind of the big flag in my head. And that's what concerns me. And especially when we're talking about them starting to use social media and the continuing growth of AI, I worry about the content they're going to be exposed to, and I worry about social interaction online. That concerns me deeply. As far as AI is concerned, my worry more there is that they're going to see, frankly, content that's just not true, or stuff that's been made up, or interact with people who aren't people, and that kind of thing worries me. AI per se, I'm still seeing it. It's a tool. I think there's an awful lot of talk about AI taking over people's jobs and making certain industries redundant and all that sort of thing. I don't necessarily see it that way yet. I think it's an incredible tool. I just don't know that it's going to replace swathes of industries as people are predicting, and I don't know that it's a danger to kids. I think it's the content that's going to fall out of it that's the danger, and that's an ongoing worry. It's a worry I have now about what is she seeing on YouTube. If she ever goes on there, which at this age she only ever does if she's sitting with us, kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's more a worry about seeing harmful or false content for my kids, but then I worry about the same thing for me.
But it's also echo chambers and algorithms and
yes,
that kind of thing, which again worries me. Now I've been watching my own children who are 10 and 7, and as you said, one of them takes to YouTube like it's nectars from God, and the other one kind of just would prefer to get a piece of paper and doodle something.
Yeah.
But the older child who likes YouTube a lot just seems to watch great, like a lot of the diet is great scientific content. He'll come crashing in my room, say, hey, can we blow up the toilet using these chemicals? And they'll name them, and they'll know how to string them together, and he'll know what tools he needs. And that's all great. And then there's your sort of screechy walkthrough game type things, which just get him hyper and drive us all nuts. So you get both. But I suppose where I'm going with this is I look at what they have available to them, and I think just on the social media part, and I've sort of said this before, my personal belief at the moment is that every generation hates the vices of the generation gone by. So the vice of our generation, when we were growing up, I remember a lot of drink driving, smoking packets, having really nasty lungs put on them because the generation before drunk and drive and smoked. And I grew up believing all of that was bad, or you need to at least moderate it. You can enjoy it and have a cigar with a friend, for example, but you wouldn't want to get in your car after that. So that's a vice that I grew up hating. I grew up loving skiing, and then snowboarding was big, and now we're back to skiing. Yeah. And so I look at all this and I look at my kids, and they hate Facebook, they hate WhatsApp, they hate TikTok, and I go, why do you hate these platforms? They're just because they're bad. And I go, okay, well, but why? Like, tell me why they're bad. And they just go, they're just bad. Like, for whatever reason, they're just bad. Just like we used to say, smoking's bad, and mom and dad, you shouldn't smoke, and you shouldn't drink.
You're right. There's definitely a lot of warning about everything.
Yeah.
Rightly. And I think as especially thinking about my 9-year-old, she doesn't really know what social media means. She's aware of Facebook. She wouldn't know what Twitter was, and she kind of only knows what TikTok is because, Daddy sometimes sits at the kitchen table and 10 minutes later it's, Daddy, you still watching TikTok? So she sort of knows what that is. But as far as she's concerned, it's funny videos. So I don't know that they've yet gotten that deep into what is social media and, talking about that in school. But I think you're right. I think that there is, there is a little sense, like she knows, for example, that she can't watch YouTube because there's going to be scary things on there. And the line we've always taken with her, and, we have all the parent controls switched on and all that sort of stuff. But she knows that there is stuff on there that she might not want to see. And she's quite a sensitive kid anyway. So, that in itself kind of keeps her at bay. And you're right, it is that same kind of, when we were growing up, it was, just say no to drugs. And, it's those things that we grow up just thinking, well, I'm just not going to touch drugs because it's just been drummed into me. It's a bad thing. I do worry a little bit that the same is going to happen with, with technology as a kind of a general subject, because technology isn't the problem. The content is the problem. And drilling into which is the type of content that they need to be concerned about, that's kind of what they need to, what schools and teachers need to focus on. YouTube is not a bad thing, but some of the content on YouTube is really bad. So it's kind of like, how do they tread that line? And there'll also obviously be parents who are like, no, I don't want them on YouTube at all. Thank you very much. I don't even want them seeing the title of a video that could be suggestive or rude or worrying to a kid, So I and I get all that as well. I think, this is a bigger conversation about those controls need to be better. The moderation needs to be better. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all of those need to be better at controlling that.
But to argue the counterpoint, they're not in the business of being better. They're in the business of stacking it high and selling it cheap. And
they're in a business. It's a business.
They're in a business. And I don't know. I keep hearing the stats of how much content per hour goes up or per minute. And it's just it just keeps, it's an exponential curve. And so how do you moderate that many things? And you sort of rely on your community.
Yeah. We've just done a couple of animation pieces for Mozilla, the non-profit behind Firefox, for example. And, they are raising awareness of the fact that, for example, when you watch YouTube, the amount of videos that you get suggested that kind of aren't what you want to see. And it's not just they're uninteresting, they're kind of taking you down rabbit holes that are clearly wrong and just taking you away from the kind of content you're originally looking for. So it's those algorithms that need looking at as well, to make sure that actually if my kid's watching a piece of content about dropping Mentos in Coke and what's the science behind that, and like you said, blowing up a washing machine or whatever that might be, that very quickly can sway into something very dark and very dangerous. And that's what needs to be better. That content suits some people. And if you're an adult and you want to watch stuff like that, that's fine. But I don't want my kids anywhere near it. And so that's the concerning part is, and that's why, mentioning earlier, we have parental control switched on. In a way, there shouldn't have to be parental controls. The algorithm, the way the content is served should be good enough that actually it knows that what my kid is watching, it knows to keep them well away from that stuff. Or me. If I'm watching videos about cars and motorbikes, I don't suddenly want to see, anything, darker than that. Thanks very much.
Well, I wonder, and this is where my head goes, because actually what you're in the business, right? You create games, and let's be honest, you create addiction. I'm not saying that's bad, but you have a conscience about it. You're also a parent. So you don't go in there thinking about metrics of, let's say engagement or sales necessarily. You just want to create something that's fun and interesting and hopefully educational, which is great. And I wish there was more people like you in the world. But to offset that, there's people out there who just go, you know what, I just sort of put the most outrageous stuff out there, stack it high, sell it cheap, get the kids on it. It's almost like, the old days of you try and sell a kid in on a football team or a religion or a cigarette or whatever, because you knew if you hook them for life, you had a customer for life. And unfortunately, now that's existing at scale. And it's hard to control. The point being is I wonder if the value is in authenticity and curation. And what I'm seeing now is especially with the expansion of things like podcasts and that sort of medium, more for adults, not for kids necessarily. But there is a marketplace where people go, can someone just curate all this for me? Yeah. Can someone tell me where the best music videos are, the best science videos? Can someone just and I don't think any of these social platforms are in that business. They're in a business to provide a platform. Content creation is separate. So certainly that's how journalism died, because of an editorial thing. But now there's just so much out there. And like you, I wake up every day and I'm saying, how do I get to the good stuff? Yeah. How do I find it? How do I, hey, I know Eugene's a great guy and he's empathetic and he's got his own kids and I'm sure he would never give me garbage. What does Eugene think? And so that's the kind of thing I see coming out as networks are growing, podcasting is growing, places where you can sort of go and get authenticity are growing in a big way. And I think a lot of that came through frankly, the pandemic, the use of misinformation. And again, I'm not taking sides in any debates. I'm just saying every side seems to be guilty of trying to shout louder than the other.
I guess where I see it most specifically with my kids is in the TV shows that they watch. Now, I say TV shows; they of course watch them on iPads and on YouTube and all the rest of it. And the shows that always get me are the ones that have charm, because the shows like Clangers or Hey Dougie, and of course Bluey, which I just think is one of the greatest television shows ever created. For parents and kids alike.
I second that, by the way, that we binge on that as a family. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, but it's charming. And the thing about charm is that it's not brash. It's not just gags. It's recognizable passion and love and warmth, and you can watch an episode of Bluey and you just get it, right? It comes out of the screen in spades. There are other shows, which certain shows containing talking dogs and a teenage boy and seemingly an unlimited budget for gadgets and vehicles. There's no moral and there's no charm in that, and it's purely there to sell toys. I don't think I'm saying anything controversial there. So, if that's the TV model, I think the same is true of gaming, in that, there are games that are just there for the bang, 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 bright lights and addiction. Whereas gaming as a medium it's a tool. It's a way to get across content and new ideas and education in a way that is engaging and fun, and therefore gets absorbed. And, so it's kind of, how do we bring that charm into what we're doing? How do we make what we're doing not just feel like it's a coin-op bash, bash, bash game, and actually it's a worthwhile activity, and it's actually, you feel like you're getting something out of it, or kids feel like they're getting something out of it. And I do think they know that. There are things that both my 4-year-old and 9-year-old will engage with, and you can see very quickly whether it's just a lacking in substance bash, bash game, or whether it's something they actually feel like they're achieving at and they're actually doing something interesting and actually they're getting something out of it. So you can see the difference there. But, you're right. It's finding that content. It's finding where is the good stuff.
Here's the danger. Here's the two ways I see it. If we talk about Bluey for a minute, yeah, that's a cleverly crafted show. I would put it on the level with The Simpsons in terms of how everyone can get something out of it. But that requires great writing, production. It requires a whole bunch of things. So they have a limited amount of episodes they can.
And as an Aussie, it's so many times I'm watching and I'm like, oh God, that's just my life. That's right. That's what we like.
So on one hand, we have content like that, which is gold dust, but of course it's limited and rare because of limitations on everything I discussed. On the other side, what I've caught my son binging was these, what I call AI videos. It is clearly a robot reading a script, and it's hammered together frames. Yeah. Now, I'd been pitched by a company that came up to me and said, you give us your footage. We run AI through it. We can identify what frames are going to get more attention based on color, motion, all kinds of metrics. And then the video gets cranked out by a machine based on these things to drive engagement. And you, by the way, you put one video in, you get 100 versions of it. And we're going to A/B test all of them and what gets the most click. So I think there's two competitions there, right? There's the gold dust Bluey type competition where we'd love to create more of this stuff, but it takes time, right? Yeah. Versus the AI route, which is, hey, you just give me one asset and I can sweat it 100 different ways, and I'll get a robot to read it in French. And that is, you can put out as much as you want in great volume and fill up the internet. And so I feel that the point I'm trying to make is, it feels to me that's kind of the danger, both as in your industry as well as a parent. I want to skew towards the high production, crafted storytelling type stuff, but it's in limited supply, unfortunately.
It is, but I think that one of the biggest mistakes that we make about our kids is their ability to sift through the wheat for the chaff, as it were. They will see that stuff and go, this is just not holding my attention. It's just junk. And I see it all the time. One of the videos that my kids love watching, it's a song about the solar system. And they can tell you all the planets in the solar system and all the moons and all the rest of it, because of this one song. Now, that's great. That's fine. And there's tons of videos out there, but that do the same thing. But this one has a little bit of charm to it. It's just got some nice characters behind it. It's not particularly high production value, but the content itself has grabbed them to the point where they'll go back to it. There's plenty of other stuff there that they've taken one look at and go, no thanks, not interested in this. So they're smart enough to kind of work out what's good content and what's not in a way. I'm less concerned about the volume of content out there. I'm more concerned about how do we sift through it and get the good stuff. Not that an amount of content is necessarily a detrimental thing, if you see what I mean. It's more that the detrimental part is it's just blocking your way. It's kind of, it's making it hard to find the good stuff. But the good stuff, again, like Bluey, it's the content is so good. The kids see that themselves. They'll watch one episode of Bluey 5 times over rather than 20 episodes of something they find on YouTube.
Interesting. So it's about diet. I mean, I guess fundamentally you're teaching them about a diet and preference and filtering. So I think as long as parents like us are paying attention, I have a positive outlook for the future. And as long as we stick together.
It's I think the greatest danger as parents is not knowing what your kids are watching and not knowing what they're doing. There have been a few occasions where I've caught my daughter looking up something on YouTube, sat at the kitchen table. I'm like, hang on a second, you're not supposed to be searching for stuff unless you've asked me and mum what you're doing, and that's purely because I don't want her to come across, God knows what, which is all too easy. So as long as we understand what they're using it for and direct them, when we see, she didn't really know what Minecraft was. And I kind of introduced her to it, and suddenly it's this huge world for her, and it's massively creative, and it's wonderful. So as long as I know what she's doing and I understand what makes her brain tick, that I can go, okay, you might really be doing this, and we help guide that to a degree. I'm very happy for her to explore new things, but it's got to be, we have to know what they're doing.
100%. And I guess to sort of come back full circle to your quote at the beginning, we want our kids to play because we realize how important it is for the future. It's now just a case of diet and staying aware, paying attention.
There's always going to be an element of, are we guarding our kids too much? I mean, I can't remember the fella's name, but there was an American guy who ran a summer school for kids doing dangerous stuff, and it was lighting fires.
Was it Tinkering School? Tinkering School.
That's the one.
Because I remember learning about that when we worked together. It was one of the case studies we had and there were 5 things they had to do: was light fires, crack DRM. Build a fort. I can't remember. There was like survival type stuff.
Yeah, and it's that sort of stuff that's again one of the, it may have actually come out of Tinker School, but it was the notion of making things knowable for kids to understand that they can learn how something works. If you take a washing machine apart, well, there's a big drum in there with a motor attached to it. Oh, that's what makes it spin around. And there's a hose here that brings the water in. Oh, okay, that's how everything gets wet. It's kind of learning that stuff. Learning there's something behind that screen. There's a reason things work the way they do. And I think the danger maybe is a little bit of if we safeguard too much on the content, it's like, well, are they missing out on stuff that could trigger other things and other routes? And that's where, something like YouTube is fabulous because you can learn anything. Unfortunately, you can also see anything, but, you can learn absolutely anything. And the amount of times that we'll be sitting at the table and, my daughter will say, well, why this or why that or what's this? And it's like, well, let's look it up. And we'll look it up and see a video and boom, there you go. When we're in Australia, we're talking about, different Australian animals and we're talking about a frilled neck lizard. And they're like, what's a frilled neck lizard? And I'm like, well, let's have a look. And, there it is on YouTube. And then they watch this funny lizard run across the ground. And they think it's hilarious. They now watch that same 2-minute video hundreds of times because they think it's funny that the lizard runs funny, but it's triggered what other animals run funny? What other animals have big, funny, frilly necks? So it triggers that curiosity.
Well, I guess it boils back to the old adage: if you've got great parents, you'll survive pretty much anything.
Well, yeah, but I would never never pretend to be the greatest parent in the world.
No one does. No one does. But
it's down, as we said at the beginning, it's down to the kids. One of my 9-year-old is an absolute sponge and just wants to learn everything. The other one would be happy running around with her hair on fire. So you've really got to make sure you're focusing the right content or the right routes to content at the right kid.
So, Eugene, this has been a fascinating discussion. I've learned a lot, and it sort of contrasts the last discussion I have. And as I said, there's no right or wrong to parenting. There's just shades of trying different things. And I've had guests now that say 0 screen time, and I've had guests that say more or less. And I think gaming, is a fascinating space for me because I'm a gamer myself. One of my kids certainly is a gamer, and I see the value in what you do and the type of things you do. So, before we wind the episode down, any sort of final thoughts?
About kids and content, but also about what we were saying about being a parent. One of my other favorite phrases, which I use an awful lot, is every day is a school day. And it goes for kids as well as parents. We don't know everything. Our opinions should change regularly. What we're learning, how we're learning it, what we think about, everything's a learning curve. And I guess that what I would make sure is that gaming is not seen as a isolated, distraction for kids. It's a tool to use to explain anything, and again, just coming back to that point I made earlier, that, if your brain is having fun, it's learning, it's soaking up, and it's open to new stuff, and it's in a positive space. So it's ready for knowledge to sink in. And, gaming or doing something fun is massively beneficial, and I don't think there's probably any educators out there that would disagree with that.
I'd like to say as a final note, I'm glad that the cartoon world lost a voice actor, but gained a gaming designer, because certainly
my silly noises get used regularly at home for both entertainment and instructions.
And I bet you got a lot of, "Oh, Dad."
We get that a lot. We get that a lot. Yeah, I'm certainly still the silly noisemaker in our house.
Amazing. Well, Eugene, thanks so much for coming on. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your insight. This was a really good conversation.
Absolute pleasure. Yeah, great to talk to you too.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of our podcast. If you like what you hear, you can dive into a lot more on thesparkhub.com.